all you nightmare nerds, and welcome to this week's New Nightmare. Today we'll be talking about a movie that has been on my radar for the past few months, and it has finally become available to stream for free literally 2 days after I cracked under the pressure and bought it. That's right, today we will be talking about Hunter x Hunter. Atmospheric, grisly, brutal, and full of twists and turns, Shawn Linden's film generated a significant amount of buzz when finally released on VOD late last year. Released to good reviews and featuring heavy-hitter horror veterans Devon Sawa and Nick Stahl, what drew my attention was the fact that every viewer insisted that the ending of this movie was bonkers and brilliant. Today, we'll talk about whether the ending can live up to its horrific hype. Welcome to New Nightmare, Hunter x Hunter. Alright, so here we are, fresh off of our first viewing of Hunter x Hunter. Josh, what are some initial thoughts and reactions to this?
Well, I gotta say, I enjoyed it a hell of a lot more than I thought I would. I don't even really know what I was expecting from it, but man, it's good. And it's tense the entire time, and then we'll get to the ending, but the ending just nails it. So good.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we're going to try to keep this as spoiler-free for you guys as we can, but we are going to try to kind of talk about the structure of this and how... I remember when I first heard about it, I saw a few things about it that caught my eye. Number one, I saw that Devon Sawa was in it, and I really, really enjoyed that because it's been a really long time since I saw his name. He obviously got mostly popular from the Final Destination is where I remember first seeing him. And he was in a few other movies. He was in Little Giants as well as in Little Giants, and he was Casper when Casper turns into a human at the end of the Casper movie. So
he had a few years there where he was just in a ton of stuff, and honestly, I didn't even recognize him. I didn't look at the cast.
Yeah, it doesn't look like him at all.
Didn't know it was him,
which is wild. Yeah, but we both really enjoyed this. This has been on my radar for a really long time, and a few weeks ago, I kind of got tired of waiting for it, and I actually bought it on my Vudu because I really wanted to watch it. I was hearing about this ending. This ending was making a lot of buzz around the horror community, and so I finally sat down to watch it. Was awesome, and then I'm flicking through Hulu last night, and I see Hunter x Hunter free on Hulu. A few days after I had finally buckled down, watched it, and bought it and everything. So fortunately for you guys, you get to watch it for free. I'm stuck with that $15 bill, but totally okay because it was totally worth it. So glad that I was able to get to see it.
At least it's an independent production that you're supporting, right?
Yeah, it's not like I spent $15 on the new Mulan or something like that. I spent
Zack
it on a
Justice League.
Right, I spent it on a movie that I'm proud to be able to support, right? Which is great. We used to talk about this thing in film school, which was availability to view when we would talk about cult movies. We always would want to see movies that were harder to get a hold of or were harder to find playing in a theater, and you'd have to go weed it out and find it. And I remember when the original Catfish documentary came out, it was before it got really, really big, and obviously long before it got made into a very successful MTV documentary series. There was a lot of buzz about it in the underground film circuit, the festival circuit. And me and my friends would look everywhere trying to find where it was playing, and the only place we could find was deep in Lower Manhattan. So we took a train into the city, into this obscure little theater to try to see it. And that experience itself made the movie a lot more interesting and intriguing to me, and was able to connect to it a lot more. And I feel like it was the same thing with Hunter x Hunter, right? We're in a little bit of a specific, unique circumstance where it was hard to see a lot of things this year, right? Certain films have been shelved that we still haven't been able to see. But this was always an indie vibe. I don't think it was ever going to get a really big release. And similarly, the end of the story is the same, because 2 weeks after I took a train into the city to see where Catfish was playing in the only theater in Manhattan, it received a national release and was playing at the theater down the street. So maybe I just have I don't know if it's good luck or bad luck, but I just have a streak of finding movies that are going to be really popular. So if you want to market your movie, I would say me.
Yeah, you've told me about how these types of things happen to you.
Yeah, I have the best luck, consistently horrible luck, but it is what it is. I got to see the movie, thought it was great. So we did find out some interesting things about this movie today, in that it was shot in one of your favorite places, right? So where was that?
Yeah, so I was admiring the scenery and the locations for this film, and it's it's middle of the woods basically the entire film, but you do get a lot of really beautiful landscape shots. It's like the foliage is there. It's like fall foliage, water and rock, and I was like, oh, this looks like when I took a trip out to the Pacific Northwest, like Central Washington a few years ago. And I think I texted you, I was like, I need to find out where this was filmed, and then I could have just Googled it before I texted you, but I Googled it and it was Manitoba. So nice Canadian scenery, beautiful Manitoba.
Shot Canadian pride once again for Josh.
Love it.
A lot of great films are being shot in Canada right now because of the tax the tax incentives to shoot there, so it's becoming more and more popular for independent and mainstream productions. So which is really great. So Hunter x Hunter is really a 4-person show. There are a few other minor characters thrown in there, but it really boils down to the 3 main characters in the central family, the Mersault family, the father, the mother, and the daughter, as well as the stranger that finds themselves entangled into their very simple life in the middle of the woods. And throughout this movie, we start to ask a lot of questions about the scenario as to where the stranger came from, what exactly is going on in the narrative, and this kind of central question that comes up to me, which is who's hunting who. And I think this narrative was really successful because I noticed something that you wrote down that I didn't really notice at first, but now that you brought it to my attention, they isolate each character at a certain point, right? And I think that's really interesting in terms of narrative. So you wrote that point down, and maybe there's something you want to add to that.
Yeah, I don't really know where I was going with that, but I did. It's striking to me whenever you're on edge, like you're basically on edge for this entire film because you don't really know what to expect. So the father character, Devon Sawa's character, he is basically, this won't spoil anything, but he's teaching his daughter how to hunt, how to live in the woods.
Right, because they're an isolated family. That's part of the narrative, in that the father wants to live this life with his family that he thinks is, I guess, like the old way, right? It's been inherited to him by his family, and this living in the woods, living off the land, and it's something that he wants to give to his daughter. And there is an internal struggle that's kind of going on this whole time between the mother and the father as to whether or not this is the right thing to do for that family.
Right, exactly. And so there are specific points in the movie where you're seeing, the daughter by herself in the woods, sort of navigating the space, and then you see the wife navigating that space, and then the father, who seemingly is the most capable of surviving and living in the woods. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because through this isolation of the narrative, where at each point in time a character is forced to be on their own, they're forced to kind of address these questions that are surrounding the family at all time, right? They're forced to identify and address the isolation that is so inherent in the type of lifestyle that the dad wants. That they're forced to confront that danger, and they're forced to confront their relationship with their family too, right? Because I think that's really interesting, because the film, to me, also, because it takes time to isolate these different characters and to let the narrative kind of breathe a little bit more naturally, it's very scattered. I remember thinking that while watching it the first time, that it felt very scattered, but it doesn't feel incohesive. It feels like it gives a very well structured narrative the opportunity to breathe through its characters, which is another reason why I thought it was excellently written, excellently paced, and excellently performed. The performances specifically from the daughter and the mother in this film are out of this world.
Incredible. Yeah. And so just to jump on that point, Mike, I found myself wondering sort of throughout the film when this movie is set. There is a moment of dialogue between the husband and wife where she's trying to convince him to live a more easier life, is I think the word that she uses. So in a town where their daughter can go to school and make friends and et cetera, and he basically, his pushback is basically that it's going to be more difficult to live that life than it is live the primitive life that they're living now. And I found that to be a really like eerie, sort of unsettling, sort of like, is this the apocalypse? Like, what are we dealing with here, you know?
Yeah, it does feel a little disjointed, right? To the point where the narrative at one point does extend to a town close by where they visit a ranger station because the father has been hunting this wolf for a few days and hasn't come back, right? And so they go to this ranger station to file a claim. And I remember thinking as soon as I saw it that it wasn't even a town or a city. It was just a ranger station out in the middle of the woods, and it still felt out of this world, right? Because it does such a great job of constructing this confined environment. It really feels like a prison, right? The wilderness is the prison, and the trees are the bars that are holding them in there, right? And even this brief kind of exploration into this ranger lodge nearby feels like it's out of place, which to the narrative's credit, right? I think that's what makes it really cool.
Yeah, and to your point about it feeling sort of disjointed, there are a lot of really great sort of stylistic choices in terms of camera angles there, where you're like seeing things diagonal and whatnot, and it's really crafty and it's really well done.
Yeah, it's shot really well. The cinematography is fantastic, and I think that's a tribute to... I always kind of, especially in low-budget independent movies, I always notice the cinematography first, right? Because at least to me, that and probably the sound are the two things that are going to take me out of the viewing experience the most. Not to say that you can't successfully shoot a feature on an iPhone, right? Because we've seen, like, Tangerine and things like that, but... the cinematography is excellent, and especially on the budget that they were giving, that's a real credit to the narrative.
I was just going to touch on the score real quick. I thought that the score was very, very well done. Lots of swelling of strings and synthy sort of low droning synths, and like we said, the tension is building the entire film, and I think it's in no small part due to the fact that the score is so exceptional.
Yeah, the score really, really, really builds to that atmosphere. So the next thing I want to touch on is what I would consider secondary to atmosphere, what would be the main horror element to this narrative, and that is the gore that is in this story. So for all of you prospective viewers out there, get ready for one, because though sparse in terms of runtime, the level of gore and violence in this is almost through the roof, right? So to the extent that there are certain things that happen that I'm like, there's no way they're going to show that. Like they're going to imply it, and then the camera turns, and you're just like, nope, they showed it. Okay, I'm seeing that right now, but. It's almost weird to consider it not gratuitous, right? Because this could be by far one of the most gory movies I've ever seen, but I don't consider it gratuitous because it enhances that narrative of hunter v hunter, of these individuals having to confront the wilderness that they put themselves in, this savage lifestyle, that though the gore extreme in every area really enhances the narrative, that I feel like movies that like gore fest like Hostel and things like that not as successful, right?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I didn't even really think of it as a gory film. I would warn people who are squeamish that it's probably not going to be that pleasant a viewing for you, especially at certain points. But I think of movies like you said, like Hostel and like Saw, like torture porn, that are just like nonstop, and this didn't feel that way.
No, and I think that's a testament to how well it was constructed, right? Because it doesn't feel like gore or over the top gore because it's so well established in the story, right? Nothing we see is considered out of the ordinary. Even the crown piece of the movie, it doesn't feel like a stretch because we've seen it before, and it doesn't feel like over the top gore because it serves such an integral purpose to the story, which I think is completely unique to this kind of movie.
Yeah, so I would say if you're into gory movies, you'll be down. If you're not into gory movies, I still say give it a shot. I think you'd like it.
Yeah, because we had talked about this a little bit before. Cause I wanted this to be part of the new Nightmares, and you hadn't seen it, and I kind of had to forewarn you, like, hey, how do you feel about gore? Because we never really talked about it. It doesn't really bother me that much. I wouldn't consider myself a gore head, but some people, even true horror purists, they're not down with the gore, at least to the level of gore that we have currently come to expect, right? Because there's certainly a difference between Hunter x Hunter, Hostel, and Argento movies of the 60s and 70s, right? There's a different level of gore going on there and realism, but it's such a non-deterrent in a movie like this because it's so ingrained in the style and the world building of the reality these characters are living that it feels natural, and though definitely extreme, it just benefits the movie so much more with its use, which I think is very unique.
Right. Yeah. And even as a staunch vegetarian, some of the obviously they're hunters, right? They have to find their food and kill it to survive.
They're living off of the land.
As squeamish as I usually am with that kind of thing, I was like, oh, this is character building. This is
sure
who they are,
So let's really jump into that ending, because if you've read anything about this film, if you've seen any reviews or things like that, it's what everybody's talking about. The ending of this film is what truly brings it all together. And not that the narrative before this or the filmmaking before this point in the movie is a letdown or anything like that, but there are certain films that I feel hinge on the ending, right? The success of the narrative, the success of the film hinges on what happens in that last 3 minutes, right? And I think this is definitely one of them. The ending is such a capstone to this narrative. It's such a stylistic jewel to the movie that it makes or breaks it, and it makes it 1,000 times over, in my opinion.
As the movie was coming to an end, I was anticipating it kind of ending in a sort of not anticlimactic, but more of a cliche way. And boy, does it turn on you, and how satisfying it was. Yeah, it was very, very good.
Ooh. There were at least 3 times during the final, I would say 5 minutes of that movie, where I went, no, out loud. And to have that kind of a reaction, like we all know we're watching pictures on a screen, right? But to be so invested and to see what's happening and thinking like, no, that can't happen. And then 2 minutes later, that can't happen. It gets you so many times, and it's really unexpected. You don't see it coming, which is so hard to find in movies nowadays.
Yeah, and to my previous point, I think I still would have very much enjoyed the film if it had ended in a very cliche way, which is entirely what I was expecting. And yeah, I think you nailed it. I think the fact that it does sort of mess with your expectations so thoroughly and nail that ending so much, I think this is like a high recommendation from me, at least. Yeah,
to me it brings it to another level, right? Because I would have been like, the movie was a great experience. It's a great study in atmosphere and tension, but that ending brings it to a different level of good to me. And there are a few other movies that I like. I feel like the ending changes the movie entirely and would be different without it. A few I wrote down, like Usual Suspects, Seven, something we just talked about, Pet Sematary. The Wicker Man, I think, is a real prime example of this, where the Wicker Man, I think, is probably the ultimate one, because I personally don't care for The Wicker Man, but that movie does not exist, does not go into horror classic transcendent fandom without that ending, right? It's the linchpin that holds the narrative together. There's no movie without that ending. Yeah. And there are films where you can make the argument that it's about the journey, it's about the build of the narrative, it's about the characters, and I think Hunter x Hunter is a really good example of all of those things. Like, it has a fantastic build, fantastic atmosphere, fantastic characters, and an ending that holds them all together like the ultimate linchpin, and just really makes it fire on all cylinders. We both really like this one, and that makes me really happy, because I really loved it, and I wanted you to love it.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I finished it out literally today, like a couple hours before we started recording, and so it's so fresh in my mind. And yeah, I think just because I was along for the ride for sure, but then yeah, because of because of the way that final act plays out, it's crazy recommendation for sure.
We both recommend this, so if you're getting on your weekend viewing material, please put Hunter x Hunter at the top of the list. And hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, whatever you got. Let us know what you thought of that ending. So from here at Nightmare Network, I'm Mike.
And I'm Josh.
We'll scare you later. Thanks for listening to the Nightmare Network podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't be afraid to give us suggestions on movies that spooked you out for our next episode. You can visit nightmarenetworkofficial.com to submit your own nightmare to be adapted into a short film on our YouTube channel. As always, at Nightmare Network, you share your scares.